Before we begin, tell me, what time is it where you are? And where in the world are you listening from tonight? If you enjoy drifting into sleep with these quiet walks through forgotten history, don't forget to subscribe. It helps support. These slow, soft journeys into the shadows of the past, where the truth is often stranger than fiction. Now lie back. Let your breath slow. And let's step gently into the darker corners of the Roman world. Not into the golden villas or shining temples you might expect, but into the courtyards of silence, the echoing cells, the whispered courts of law, where crime met consequence, sometimes fairly, but more often in ways that baffle us today, because when Rome punished you, it didn't always want justice. Sometimes it wanted spectacle. Sometimes it wanted control, and sometimes it just wanted to remind you who held the leash. Imagine walking through a Roman forum at sunrise. Shops still shuttered, dust curling in low spirals, statues casting long shadows over empty stone, and then the clatter of chains. You follow the sound. A crowd is beginning to gather at the center of the square, yawning, whispering, clutching warm cups of watered wine. You see him, the condemned man. His crime: stealing a loaf of bread from the wrong bakery. But Rome doesn't just scold thieves, it marks them. He is stripped to the waist. A branding iron waits near the fire. The letters FVR, for fur, thief, will be burned into his forehead forever. He won't die. He'll live, but branded, disfigured, and avoided for the rest of his life. You hear the hiss of metal. You don't stay to watch, because in Rome it's best not to look too long at someone else's punishment. Later that week you pass a group gathered by the Tiber, not a festival, not a market, a trial, but not the kind with arguments and scrolls. And lawyers. This is different. This is a woman's accused of poisoning her husband. In a world without forensic science, truth is often decided by belief, or pressure, or fear. The penalty, if she's convicted, not death by sword, not hanging, but something more symbolic and more bizarre. She'll be sewn into a sack called a cullius, along with 4 other creatures: a monkey, a snake, a rooster, and a dog. Why? No one really knows. Maybe because each animal symbolized something corrupt. Maybe because it was chaotic. Maybe because it just made the punishment seem divinely horrifying. Once inside the sack, still alive, all 5 are thrown into the river, drowning, biting, flailing. It's called poena culae, and it was considered too sacred, too severe for everyday use. But it happened, especially when Rome wanted to make a lesson out of someone. You walk away before they start sewing the leather shut. At another corner of the city, you hear whispers of a soldier found guilty of falling asleep during his watch. It's not a crime with victims, but it's a breach of discipline, and Roman discipline is sacred. His punishment, the fustuarium, a ritual beating to death by his own fellow soldiers. They surround him in a circle. They don't want to. Some weep. Some turn away. But if they refuse to participate, they'll be next. And so the beating begins, slow, methodical, ritual. You are not allowed to watch. But you hear it from across the camp, the steady rhythm of wood on bone. The sounds end. The silence stays longer. Punishments weren't always deadly. Sometimes they were meant to humiliate. You pass a street near the theatre of Pompey. There, tied to a post, stands a man in women's clothing, makeup smeared across his cheeks. A basket of coins hung around his neck. His crime, pretending to be a senator during a drunken night out. The punishment, mockery. He's made to stand there all day, People toss coins and insults, unsure which is worse. No one touches him, but no one looks away. The shame will outlast the bruises. In the countryside, things are simpler, but not always kinder. A farm boy is caught stealing a neighbor's grain. He's only 12, but the landowner insists on the ancient testa rota, the pot punishment. He is made to stand barefoot on hot clay shards, not for long, just enough to slice, to scar, to remind. He cries. The neighbors pretend not to hear. Rome loved punishment that fit the crime. If you were caught forging coins, your hands might be crushed between two stones. If you lied in court, you might have your tongue pierced with a red-hot nail. If you killed your father, well, that was one of the gravest crimes of all. Parricide, it was rare. But when it happened, the punishment was carefully choreographed. The criminal's head would be covered in a bag. He would be whipped with blood-colored rods. Then, like how the woman you saw earlier, he'd be sewn into a sack with those same 4 animals and thrown into the river. But not all punishments were physical. Some were social. Legal exile. Public disgrace. The removal of your citizen status. To a Roman, losing your citizenship was worse than flogging. It meant losing your identity. No longer able to vote. No longer able to marry legally. No longer able to be buried in Roman soil. Some would rather die than be erased. One day you hear a strange story from a traveling merchant. In a town far south, a man was punished for writing satire, poems mocking the emperor. He wasn't executed, not publicly. Instead, he was sentenced to a form of invisible isolation. Every morning he would report to a magistrate. He could not leave his house after dusk. He could not speak in the forum. He could not teach, write, or even recite aloud. And whenever he walked through the market, a man walked behind him ringing a bell, so people would know, not to punish, but to shame. As the sun sets on the city, you sit by the edge of the Capitoline Hill. The marble glows orange. The streets slowly empty. You think of all the things you've seen, the punishments, the fear, the spectacle, the theater of pain and justice. And you wonder, how many of these were about law, and how many were just about power? You never get an answer, only another day, another name, another sack. The city never fully sleeps. Even as the lamps burn low and the last shutters creak closed, Rome breathes quietly, heavily. Somewhere in the dark, a magistrate unrolls a scroll by candlelight, his eyes flicking across the names of the condemned, the accused, the forgotten. The wax seal beside him bears the image of justice, blindfolded and cold. But in truth, she rarely is. Tonight your feet carry you down a quieter street, one lined with ivy-covered walls and broken tiles, where the ghosts of punishment linger, not in screams or blood, but in the whispers of old laws etched into stone. There's an inscription on the wall near the Temple of Concord. Let no man strike a senator, nor speak ill of the gods, nor raise his hand against the Father who raised him. You run your fingers along the lettering. The stone is smooth now, the words half-eaten by time, but the message lingers like incense, thick, sacred, and full of consequence. By morning, the courts have reopened. You slip into the back of a crowded atrium, unnoticed, blending with the crowd of sandals and dust. A trial is underway, a woman accused of breaking her marriage vows. The man stands rigid beside her, his white toga stiff with starch, his jaw tight. She looks down, fingers twisting the hem of her veil. In ancient Rome, adultery wasn't just a sin. It was a public disgrace, a threat to the integrity of lineage and the purity of bloodlines, especially for women. And the punishment? If convicted, she'll lose her dowry. She may be exiled to a distant island, unable to see her children again, or worse, she may be forced to live under the legal control of her husband's family, stripped of her freedom like a slave in her own home. The verdict isn't announced yet, but the silence in the room feels like a sentence. Later in the marketplace, a whisper spreads. Someone has been accused of impietas, impiety. A vague word, but dangerous. He's said to have insulted the gods, perhaps refused to sacrifice, or worse, laughed during a public ritual. In a city where religion is law and gods are part of the government, that's more than blasphemy. That's rebellion. The punishment? It could be anything. A fine, a public flogging, or exile so total that even his name is erased from the records. Damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, a punishment for traitors, heretics, and the deeply inconvenient. Their statues are pulled down, their names chiseled out, their portraits defaced. It's not just death, it's unbeing. You walk past a sculptor's stall and see a face carved in half, in nose missing, eyes scratched away. The past still fights to be remembered, even when Rome fights harder to forget. In the afternoon, you visit the Campus Martius, the field of Mars. Not for war games today, for discipline. A young nobleman is being punished for cheating at the public games. He paid a runner to take his place in a race. It wasn't subtle. It didn't need to be. But someone saw and someone reported. He's made to run the entire course alone, barefoot, in silence, holding a heavy stone over his head. The crowd watches, unimpressed. He trips once, then twice. Blood mixes with dust. But he keeps running. Not because of honor, but because if he stops, he'll face worse. His father stands nearby, expression blank, but his hand is clenched tight around a reed cane. This is Roman shame. Quiet, public, and designed to last longer than bruises. Later, you pass a guard leading 2 chained prisoners into the basilica. They've been caught conspiring to rob a treasury temple. Their punishment will not be quick. They won't be executed. They'll be enslaved, not to households, but to the state. Servi publici, public slaves. Their days will be spent cleaning sewers, scraping wax from statues, sweeping ashes after festivals. Not in chains, but in total invisibility. They'll wear a tunic marked with red thread, and they'll never be addressed by name again. You watch them disappear behind the columned arch, and you wonder, is it better to die in Rome, or to live without ever being seen? On the Aventine Hill, the smell of burning flesh curls in the air, not war. Not sacrifice punishment. A blacksmith's apprentice is being burned with a hot iron, not to kill him, but to mark his body with the symbol of theft. He stole a ring, worth very little, but the owner was powerful. The sentence was swift, a small brand on the wrist. The letter F for thief. He doesn't scream. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because in Rome silence is the last dignity you can control. The sun begins to drop, and the forum glows gold again. You cross paths with a man walking in silence. Der wooden yoke across his shoulders, small bells tied to the ends. He's been convicted of lying in public office. The punishment isn't death, it's humiliation. He must walk the entire circuit of the city, yoke in place, bells ringing, face painted. Red like a clown. People spit, some laugh, others pretend not to see. He walks anyway because if he doesn't, he'll be dragged, and the punishment will only grow worse. By nightfall, the prisons groan behind thick stone, not cells with bars, but deep, windowless dungeons, carved into the rock beneath the Capitoline, the Tullianum. You've never seen it inside. Few have. Fewer return. It's where state enemies are kept, conspirators, assassins, those who embarrassed the Senate or crossed the emperor. Some are starved slowly, others are suffocated. No one speaks of it openly. But if you listen closely, sometimes at night you hear them singing, not in fear but in defiance, because even under the weight of Rome's laws, the human voice refuses to die quietly. You return home at last. Your feet ache. Your tunic is damp with sweat and grime. But your mind is full, not of blood, not of violence, but of the quiet ways Rome punished the soul, through shame, through silence, through forgetting. And you wonder how many people walk the streets around you, smiling, selling, nodding politely, carrying invisible punishments. You'll never see a branded name, a lost citizenship, a brother exiled for a joke told too loud. In Rome, the worst punishments weren't always visible. Sometimes they just lingered, like the bitter smell of burned garum, stuck to the skin, impossible to wash off. The next morning begins like any other in the eternal city. Birdsong filters through the cracks between roof tiles, mixed with the rustle of brooms brushing last night's dust off stone steps. Somewhere nearby, a rooster calls, late, confused, unaware that his kind once shared sacks with sinners and drowned gods alike. Rome yawns, stretches, and begins again. But you, still walking half in dream and half in memory, move slowly today. Because once you've seen the underbelly of Roman punishment, once you've heard the soft hiss of iron in flesh, the ceremonial silence before shame, it's hard to look at the city the same way. You pass a row of magistrates in their white-bordered togas standing outside a tribunal. They sip watered wine, murmur quietly, and pretend that the blood staining yesterday's forum stones has already dried. It hasn't. Not far from here, a centurion walks a young man down a narrow alley. The boy isn't shackled. He's barely more than 16, but the look in his eyes is older than any veteran's, hollow, distant, resigned. His crime wasn't theft, nor violence. He was caught with another man. And though the law bends depending on your class, your age, your status, for him it bent the wrong way. Rome tolerated many things in private, but if your preferences embarrassed the wrong noble, if your name ended up on the wrong scroll, the punishment wasn't just legal, it was cultural, social exile, forced conscription, public beating. In this case, he's being sent to a border outpost alone to serve in silence for 25 years. If he returns, and few do, he'll return to nothing. No home, no name, no record. You pause near a bakery and watch a woman count coins with trembling fingers. She's old, bent at the waist like a reed in winter, but still working, still moving, still paying a price. Years ago, they say, she was convicted of casting a spell. Nothing dark, nothing harmful, just a charm. A bundle of herbs buried in her doorway to ward off illness. But a neighbor reported her. Jealousy, probably, or fear. The court didn't execute her. That was rare for witches. Instead, they cut her hair publicly, whipped her through the streets and forbade her from entering any temple ever again. Now she sells stale loaves to soldiers. She looks up as you pass, you nod. She doesn't. She's learned not to return the gaze of strangers. By midday, the sun hangs high, casting harsh light through the arches of the aqueduct above. Children play near the steps of a bathhouse, rolling dice carved from bone. One of them bumps into a man you recognize, a former tribune. You remember when his face adorned public statues. Now he wears a coarse tunic. No rings, no sandals. He was once powerful, until he questioned a senator's marriage in public. He wasn't Shada tried. He wasn't accused of treason. He was simply erased, stripped of all status and sent to live as a pauper within the very city he once ruled. Some say this is mercy, but you can see in his eyes, mercy has teeth and it bites every time. Someone forgets your name. You pass by the Casa again, the underground prison near the Forum. No one speaks its name aloud. The Tullianum, the pit. There are no windows, no air, and it's not a place for long sentences. It's a place where people are put to wait, sometimes for a final judgment, sometimes for execution, but often just to vanish. Inside those damp stone walls, senators once strangled kings and emperors silenced poets. In the dark, no one dies loudly, only slowly, only forgotten. At dusk, you overhear a merchant arguing with a guard over taxes. His paperwork is in order, but his accent is foreign. That's enough. The guard threatens to report him for falsifying tribute weights, a serious crime. If he's convicted, he won't be. Fined, he'll be bound to a post outside the temple gates for 3 days, with a sign hung around his neck. Fraudster, trust not this man's coin, nor his word. No one will stop to read his defense. Only the sign, only the shame. Punishments weren't always harsh, but they were always intentional. A slave who ran away once might be beaten, a second time branded on the forehead with "fug." Fugitivus, runaway, a third time. He'd be forced to wear a heavy iron collar for life, engraved with the words, "Hold me, lest I escape again." Return me to my master, Aurelius Felix, of the Calian Hill. Some wore the collar until they died, not from strangulation, but from never again being seen as human. You pause near a statue of Mars, chipped and mossy with age. It's said that long ago, a Vestal virgin was buried alive nearby. Her crime, letting the sacred fire go out, or worse, breaking her vow of chastity. They didn't slit her throat. That would spill sacred blood. Instead, they led her to a small underground room prepared with a bed, a lamp, a loaf of bread, and a single jug of water. Then they sealed the entrance. Above, priests said prayers. Below, she waited until the lamp went out and silence returned. That night, as you wander past the Circus Maximus, a different sort of punishment whispers on the wind. The games, where criminals were sometimes given mercy, a chance to entertain. The crowd, unarmed, half-naked, they were made to fight wild animals, lions, leopards, bears starved for 3 days, not for justice, but for applause. Those who died well were sometimes honored. Their names remembered for a moment. Those who ran, forgotten, trampled, laughed at. The games weren't a courtroom, but they delivered judgment all the same. At last you return to your rented room, a single bed, a stool, and a clay lamp barely holding its flame. Outside, Rome sleeps, but you lie, awake, eyes open, mind turning. You wonder how many of the people you passed today were carrying punishments invisible to the eye. A scar hidden beneath a tunic, a debt unpaid, a name once honored, now spat on. In Rome, justice was never blind. She looked closely, she listened quietly, and when she struck, she did it in ways that could not always be seen, only felt, only remembered. The next day unfolds with the same gentle rhythm, a city grinding forward in silence, its heartbeat slow, deep, and never-ending. You wake before the bells. There is no bird song this morning, just a grey sky pressing down like a stone lid and the sound of wagon wheels grinding over rough stones outside your window. It's market day, but not for food. Today's market is for labor and punishment. You step into the street and follow the crowd to the edge of the Subura district, where the poorest of Rome gather like fog around crumbling walls. Here justice smells less like incense, and more like sweat, rust and fear. A platform has been built, simple, wooden, temporary. A magistrate stands above it, reading aloud from a scroll, his voice steady but indifferent. Below him, 2 men kneel. They are debtors. They owe too much, and have paid too little. In modern times we might speak of interest, bankruptcy, restructuring, but in Rome debt was not abstract. Debt was flesh. Debt was breath. And when you could not pay, your body became the payment. These men are not being executed, they're being handed over to their creditors. For a time agreed upon by law, they will serve, not as slaves, not permanently, but as living currency. The creditor may use them as labor, or display them as a warning, or simply parade them through the streets holding signs around their necks, listing what they owe. This is called addictio, and it is not rare. The crowd murmurs. Some pity them, others nod coldly, proof that justice still holds weight in a city where even stone seems soft under the sun. You move on. The street tightens, winding past a row of ancient shrines now half buried beneath apartments. You see a boy standing still against a wall, eyes wide, knees trembling. Behind him, a thin man holds a wooden paddle. It's a schoolmaster. Discipline in the Roman world starts early. A missed recitation, a scribbled verse, a complaint from a neighbor. All reasons enough for a few quick lashes. The paddle is marked with carved letters, a cruel joke. Ratio, it reads. Reason. Even punishment must be rational, they say. But the child's tears aren't logical. They are human. Further uphill you pass the domus of a wealthy merchant. Outside, a young woman scrubs the pavement, knuckles raw, hair cut short. A year ago, she was a priestess. Then a rumor surfaced. She had stolen gold offerings from a minor temple, coins meant for the poor. Whether true or not didn't matter. The accusation was enough. She was stripped of her station, her sacred clothing taken, her role in the temple erased. But the punishment did not end there. Her penance was to serve the city, visible, shamed, humbled. Every morning she cleans public steps and alleys. Every evening she returns to a shared tenement. She is not in chains, but every person who sees her knows. She's the one who defiled the altar. And in Rome, reputation is harder to rebuild than marble. The day grows warm. Heat rises from the paving stones, wavering in waves that make the city shimmer like a mirage. You duck into the shadow of a colonnade and overhear 2 men whispering about an older case. One whispered through taverns and bathhouses, but never recorded on scrolls. A senator's son once fell in love with an actress, not a noblewoman, not even a freedwoman, an actress, a profession considered little more than prostitution in Roman law. He tried to marry her, secretly. When discovered, he wasn't disinherited, nor exiled, nor executed. The Senate ordered something stranger, a play, a public play, staged in the theater of Pompey, funded by the state, written quickly by some unnamed poet. It told the story of a foolish young noble, weak, impulsive, easily seduced. The actress's name wasn't used, but her face was mimicked, her gestures copied. The performance was attended by thousands. By the end, the senator's son couldn't walk the street without hearing lines from the script hissed. Behind his back, he fled to Sicily. She returned to the stage. Punishment by fiction, a fate worse than fact. At the edge of the Aventine, near an old olive grove, you stumble upon a column half buried in weeds. Its base bears the faded inscription, "Here was unmade the man who lied to Mars." No one knows his name, but the story lingers. He was a soldier who faked an injury to escape the front. Not cowardice, not betrayal, just fear, and Rome did not tolerate fear. When he was caught, he was made to march naked through the city, wearing only the armor he had claimed he could not bear. It was far too heavy. He collapsed before the gates. The armor was nailed to a tree, his name carved below it, and then erased. You stand before the cracked stone and feel the wind rise, brushing the grass like a ghost's sigh. Even the earth remembers, even when names fade. As the sun lowers, the streets begin to fill with returning. Workers, their sandals dusty, their arms sore, but your steps lead away was toward the river, because that's where the strangest punishments of all often ended, the Tiber. A river that gives and takes. Its current has carried more than trade and travel. It has swallowed confessions, corpses and truths too heavy for stone. One punishment involved silence. A man was convicted of writing satire, again, mocking a minor official, a man whose power was small but ambition was large. The punishment was not exile, not death, but speechlessness. His tongue was not cut. Instead, he was made to live among the mute for a year, forced to learn their signs, their silences, their world. Each day he stood at the market and gestured stories he could no longer tell. People came to watch. Some laughed, some wept. When his sentence ended, he refused to speak again. Not because he couldn't, but because, he said, silence was safer. That night, back in your small room, you light a new candle. The wax flickers gently, pooling at its base. You think of all the punishments you've seen. Not the bloody ones, not the ones with screams, but the quiet ones, the ones that linger, the man walking with bells, the girl with the broom. The actor turned into a cautionary tale. Rome is a city that believes in order, but beneath its order, punishment flows like a second river, invisible, slow, but constant, and you know it will continue. Tonight, tomorrow. For, as long as people break rules or forget their place, or speak too loudly near the wrong ears, you blow out the candle. The room darkens, but the stories stay lit, soft and endless, waiting to drift quietly into sleep. The next morning unfolds with a softer light. A dull haze clings to the city like thin linen hung out to dry. It mutes everything. The voices of the merchants, the calls of birds overhead, even the sound of iron carts rolling across ancient roads. You walk with slower steps today. The stories of yesterday cling to you like smoke, and yet Rome offers more. Not always with blood, sometimes with a whisper. Down a narrow corridor behind the Temple of Concord, there's an old building most citizens pass without a second glance. It once held the offices of the Tres Viri Capitals, Rome's early criminal magistrates. Their name isn't remembered the way emperors are, but their decisions shaped lives. This morning you find a crowd gathering near its base, not for a trial, but for something quieter, a list. Each month they post the names of those who've been infamed, a form of civil disgrace. Not an execution, not exile, but a stripping away of rights. Some names are crossed out, some are freshly inked. You read Marcus Petilius, struck a patron in anger. Livia Scaura, violated sacred rights by laughing in temple. Publius Servilius, forged a will. Amatia Lucilla consorted with a gladiator. No punishment follows, but they no longer have the right to speak in court, to hold office, to vote, to be seen as honorable. In a city obsessed with status, it's a living death, and there is no ceremony, only ink and memory. You wonder how long your own name would last on such a list before the rain washed it away in the Forum Boreum, where cattle once traded hands beside sacred altars. You find a crumbling statue half swallowed by ivy. No one tends to it anymore, but its story remains. A baker once cheated customers by mixing chalk into flour. He wasn't fined, nor jailed. Instead, the magistrate ordered a public baking, not bread, but mockery. The man was made to wear an enormous loaf made of hardened clay around his neck, while standing atop a raised wooden oven with smoke pouring around his feet. He stood for a full day. People laughed. Children threw crusts. Vendors shouted prices at him. He was not hurt, but he never sold another loaf in Rome again. By midday, the sun breaks through the haze. It sharpens the marble statues, makes every crack and chip stand out. You find yourself in the garden of a retired quester, an old friend of a friend. He offers watered wine and points lazily to a patch of ground where purple flowers bloom low. There, he says, is where they once beat the linen boy. You ask why. He sighs. He mixed the togas, put the wrong names on the wrong folds. 3 senators wore each other's robes to the same feast. That might seem small, but in Rome, your toga is not just cloth. It's your identity, your dignity, your politics. The punishment? He was stripped of his own tunic, beaten with a stiff linen cord, and made to sit naked outside the same feast with a sign, "I forget what belongs to whom." It was decades ago, but the old man still remembers the boy's face. "I think he changed his name after that," he murmurs, "or left the city." You walk downhill, past the baths of Caracalla, where steam still curls skyward even in the heat. There you see another kind of shame, one stitched into skin rather than name. A former military servant limps past with a branded mark on his arm. SPQR Senatus Populusque Romanus, the mark of Rome itself. But this one is scorched, upside down, deliberate. You hear later he was once caught looting from a battlefield. Not enough to be killed, but enough to be claimed. His brand was inverted, a constant sign of dishonor. It cannot be removed. He wears a linen sleeve now, even in summer, but cloth doesn't hide shame from those who know how to look. Later, by the banks of the Tiber, you see a strange sight. A group of older women, draped in heavy shawls, kneeling along the edge of the embankment. They are casting small bundles into the river. Each contains herbs, salt, feathers, and 1 silver coin. They say it's a ritual of penance. They are matronae, once respected widows, now quietly marked by scandal, not punished in court, but socially unseated. Whispers follow them, of unapproved affairs, of lending, money in secret, of being seen at gladiator schools after dark. The city didn't try them. It exiled them in place. Now they walk in silence. They kneel at rivers. They offer coins not to gods, but to the city's memory, so it might forget. Evening approaches. You find yourself at the edge of a vineyard just outside the Servian wall. There's a tree here that children avoid. The bark is dark. The soil beneath never quite dries. They say it's where a nobleman once punished his slaves, not for escaping, not for theft, but for gossip. He feared their voices more than their rebellion, so he forced them into silence, not by cutting tongues. Rome rarely allowed such mutilation in private homes, but by fitting each one with a gag made of olive wood and copper. It stayed in for a week, removed only to eat and wash. They wore them while working in the fields, and every person who passed knew, not from the gags themselves, but from the silence. No laughter, no song, no talk. In Rome, silence could be louder than any scream. As night begins to settle over the rooftops, you walk toward the Janiculum Hill. From here, you can see the glow of torchlight winding through the city streets. A procession, but not of celebration. It's the walk of reversal. A punishment reserved for those who spread false prophecies. The condemned is walked backward through the city, from their home to the temple they blasphemed against, wearing a tunic sewn inside out. Their hair is uncombed, their sandals mismatched. They must answer no questions, only walk. Backwards. The idea is simple. Those who reverse truth must now reverse the world, and when they arrive at the temple, they are given a small clay tablet with the words, "Noli mentiri," do not lie. They must carry it until the day they die, break it, and they'll be exiled beyond the empire. No one knows where the last one ended up. Some say a cave in the Alps, others say the bottom of the sea. You return home in darkness. The lamplight flickers gently on your wall, casting long shadows of ancient lives. You've seen no executions today, no gallows, no spilled blood, and yet you've seen so many punished, branded arms, ink-stained scrolls, mocked bakeries, backwards walks, silent fields, stiff linen cords, each one a whisper, a reminder, a warning. Rome is not loud with justice. It is quiet, unrelenting, creative. Sometimes, say even poetic, but always watching, always remembering, and as you drift into sleep you feel that watching too. Not cruel, not kind, just Roman. There is a silence in Rome that only the early mornings know, not the silence of peace, the silence of watching, of a city always awake, even when its people sleep. You walk slowly along the Via Lata. Mist rolls low between columns like spilled milk, and distant dogs bark once and fall silent again. There's no urgency, only presence. This morning, your feet carry you to a place often overlooked, an old warehouse near the docks that's been converted into a state records vault. Inside, parchment and wax tablets sleep beneath dust. But what matters most here are not laws or decrees. What matters are shadows. Here is where the punishments Rome tried to forget are kept, not erased, but locked in language so vague they barely make sense anymore. One entry catches your eye. A woman named Caesia Rufila, charged with inviting improper attention while mourning. You imagine the story. Her husband died, too soon perhaps, too rich, and when she appeared at the temple in fine clothing, freshly oiled hair and a hint of paint on her cheeks, the city looked at her and whispered, "The punishment? Not exile, not fine." She was made to sit outside the temple of Vesta for 7 days, dressed in grey, holding a broken mirror. She was to greet each passerby with silence and let them look as long as they wished. The law called it restoration of humility, but it was theatre, as much for the crowd as for her. By the time you leave the records house, the sun has begun its slow climb behind the rooftops. The light spills across cracked stone like honey over bread, thick, golden, soft-edged. You follow. The smell of warm grain to a bakery tucked beside an old cistern. There a small crowd is gathered, not to buy bread, but to watch a scene unfold. A man kneels in the ash outside the door, ash on his head, ash on his shoulders, his tunic torn at the collar. A wooden spoon is tied around his neck with twine. This is an apology. He is a baker who undermeasured grain for military bread, shorting a centurion's order by 3 full loaves. It wasn't theft, it was haste. But in Rome, Soldiers don't eat last, so now he must kneel outside every morning for 1 week, wear the spoon and offer a single copper to every soldier who passes. His day's earnings gone in penance. Some soldiers take it, others toss the coin back at his feet. Either way, he does not speak. He is not allowed to speak until the week ends. You drift away from the crowd, down an alley, toward a courtyard you remember from some half-forgotten walk, and there you find it. The wall, blackened, scorched, crumbling at the base. It is called the Corner of Silence. No one speaks here, even children run past without laughter. A century ago, it was the site of a punishment so quiet, so strange, that no one rebuilt on the land. A man named Gallus, an artist, a mosaicist, was caught embedding secret symbols into the floors of wealthy homes. Symbols mocking the Senate, symbols cursing generals, symbols no one noticed. Until they did. He wasn't imprisoned. Instead, the state commissioned him to tile the floor of a new forum bathroom. Every day he laid mosaics, every night inspectors removed them. He was told to start over, again and again. He tiled that floor for 7 months. It was never finished. The punishment ended only when his hands could no longer hold the tesserae. He disappeared. The wall remains, and no one speaks near it now, not out of fear, but out of habit. Later, in the shadow of the Pantheon, you sit beside an old fountain where broken gods once stood. A group of boys walk past, heads shaved unevenly. Eyes low, their clothing is fine, too fine for beggars. You ask a nearby vendor what their crime was. He shrugs. Mocked a priest in the street, called Jupiter a drunkard. One of them painted horns on the temple wall. The punishment? For nobles? It had to sting without drawing blood, so their hair was shaved, patchy, uneven, publicly humiliating, and they were made to serve water to the poor for a full month. Each carried a jug and a cup. They must refill anyone who asks, and they may not drink themselves until dusk. It is not the thirst that punishes them. It is the service, the reminders, the lowered eyes. As the heat of the day presses down, you retreat toward the northern districts, where quiet houses line the slope and orange trees droop over whitewashed walls. Here you pass a doorway carved with an unfamiliar shape, a small circle with a line through it. You learn later what it means. It's the house of a woman once punished with imposed forgetting, not erasure, not exile, for writing a satire under a pseudonym that mocked a certain family. When she was caught, the punishment was not death. It was more Roman than that. Every mention of her name was to be struck from public records. No charges, no announcement. Instead, she was to live as though she had never existed in the eyes of the city, her home marked, her name unwritten. No public speech permitted to reference her. No friend allowed to greet her in public. No merchant to call her by name. If she needed a purchase, she must hold up her fingers. If she was called on, she must answer without sound. And slowly, day by day, the world began to forget her. She still lives there, it said, behind that door with no voice, no name, and no crime anyone can quite recall. Evening returns, golden first, then violet, then grey. You find yourself by the Circus Maximus, where wildflowers now bloom where wheels once raged. There is a stone here marked with nothing, but the story it holds is sharp. A charioteer once threw a race, not for money, not for favor, but out of love. His lover's family had bet against him, and he wanted them to win. He lost deliberately, and was caught. The punishment? He was made to walk the track alone in silence after every race for 1 full season. Always last. No reins, no horses, only footsteps. The people laughed at first. then pitied, then forgot. And when the season ended, he vanished. But they say on quiet evenings, if the wind is low, you can still hear those footsteps, steady, deliberate, unseen. You return home slowly. Each step feels heavier than the last, not from fatigue, but from memory, from names half remembered, from stories the city doesn't write down but never quite loses. The candle is lit, the room quiet. You sit and think of the punishments that didn't bleed, the ones that whispered, that echoed, that seeped. Haircuts, backward tunics, silence, service, ash. In Rome, punishment didn't always shout. Sometimes it hummed beneath your name, beneath your sandals, beneath the breath you didn't dare take. And tonight, as you fall into sleep, you feel it hum still, soft, low, endless, just like the city. It is some time after midnight, and though most of Rome sleeps, the sky has not gone completely dark. There's a pale silver cast above the rooftops. Moonlight filters through lattice shutters. The streets are mostly empty, except for a few shadowed figures moving slowly, as if carrying something heavier than themselves. You walk softly, not because you're afraid, but because this hour demands it. There are punishments that are not seen in daylight, not out of shame, but out of reverence. There's a statue tucked behind a column in the Forum Holitorium. One few visitors notice. It's not grand, just a slender marble boy with closed eyes, holding a scroll against his chest. Its base reads only one word: Tacitus. Not the historian. Just the word for silent. The boy once served as a reader in a senator's house, reciting poetry at banquets, whispering news in quiet corridors. But one evening, he misread a line in a love poem meant to soften a bitter alliance. Instead of praise, the words came out as insult, a single vowel too sharp. A metaphor reversed. The marriage fell through, the alliance collapsed, the senator lost favor. The punishment? He was not whipped, he was not exiled. Instead, he was given a single scroll, blank, wrapped in red string. He was told to carry it always, and to never speak again. He walked the streets each morning, as the city woke, scroll in hand, head bowed. No words, only the story people told about him. Years later, after his death, they carved that statue, not out of cruelty, but out of memory. Further east, near a crumbling aqueduct arch, stands a stone platform, no taller than your knee. It looks like a place for a basin or offering dish, but long ago it served another purpose. A senator's wife once accused a slave girl of wearing perfume too fine for her station. It was suspected she'd taken it from the lady's own chamber. The girl denied it. There was no trial, no formal charge. Instead, she was ordered to stand barefoot on the platform at dawn for 10 days, holding a basin of water, infused with oil and rose petals. Every morning, passers-by would dip their fingers in it. Every evening, it was emptied and refilled. She could not move, she could not speak. She could only stand. The punishment wasn't physical. It was olfactory, symbolic. A girl made into the very fragrance she was accused of stealing. When it ended, she left the house. No one knows what became of her. But for years afterward, people avoided perfume made from roses. They said it reminded them of silence. By morning, the sun rises reluctantly, a slow bloom of color along the rooftops, warm ochre and dusty orange, the kind of light that makes old stone glow with life again. In a quiet alley near the old grain market, you hear the tapping of wooden sandals. A man walks with slow, deliberate steps. His head is shaved except for a single tuft at the crown, dyed red and tied upright like a brush. He wears a belt of leather tags, each stamped with a name. He is a former scribe who falsified grain weights in his ledgers, favoring one merchant over another in exchange for wine. He was not jailed. Instead, he was given the title Domitus Penne, the broken feather. For 1 month he must serve as a public writer for no coin. He walks the market each morning offering to write letters, mark accounts, copy receipts, but instead of payment, he must accept whatever the person chooses to give: a coin, a crust, an insult. He accepts all three the same way, with a nod and a stroke of his worn-down pen. Near the edge of the Aventine Hill there's a cellar door half covered in ivy. You might mistake it for a storeroom, but beneath it lies an old wine vault once used to punish tavern owners who served watered-down drink during festivals. One in particular, Tertius of the Crimson Jug, was infamous for adding river water to imported Gaulish wine. He was caught during the feast of Liber, the punishment? For the remainder of the festival, he was locked in his own cellar with 12 barrels, each filled with wine of various purity, each unlabeled. His task? To identify the real one. He had only scent and taste, and no light. Each time he guessed wrong, the correct barrel was tapped and poured out into the street. On the final day he emerged blinking, drunk, and terrified of wine forever. He never served again. Some say he moved north and became a fishmonger, but no one ever saw him with a cup in hand. At midday, you find yourself in the shadow of a broken theatre, its columns crumbling, its steps worn, smooth. Here, beneath the arcades, actors once punished each other not with words but with mimicry. If one performer broke character, mispronounced Latin or improvised vulgarity, he would be made to endure the echo right. A row of junior performers would follow him for an entire day, repeating every word he said in the most exaggerated tone possible. If he tried to stay silent, they mimicked his breathing. If he mumbled, they moaned. If he sneezed, they cheered. By sunset, the punished actor would be left speechless, out of frustration or shame, or simply exhaustion. It was cruel and strangely theatrical, but it ensured that stage discipline was never taken lightly again. Late afternoon, the shadows begin to stretch, Rome begins to soften, and your footsteps carry you toward the edge of the Field of Mars, where firewood vendors stack their kindling in high, sweet-smelling pyramids. Here, beside the flame, you meet an old woman with a basket of burned parchment. She once served as a custodia verborum, a keeper of forbidden phrases. It was her duty to listen in temples and baths, to note those who blasphemed through sarcasm or euphemism. But one day, she failed to report a nobleman who mocked the emperor in metaphor. She claimed she didn't understand it. They claimed she did. Her punishment: she was forced to memorize 30 lines of formal apology, each composed by a different magistrate, and recite them to the wind at dawn from the top of the Capitoline steps. No audience, no applause, no forgiveness, only wind. Now she sells fire starter, scrolls, burned copies of state poems, each one sold with a bow and no words, only silence and a tiny nod of farewell. As twilight arrives, you feel the hush of the city deepen, not from fear but from ritual, from the knowledge that everything, even punishment, has its place, even shame must sleep, and in Rome, even sleep has rules. You return to your room with its thin linen sheets, its cracked oil lamp, its carved stone bowl of figs. You sit, and you think of all the ways Rome could hurt without striking, could silence without gagging, could brand without blade. You've seen men mocked with theatre, women erased with perfume, boys turned into statues, wine become test and trap, voices turned into shadows, and all without blood, only presence, only permanence. The empire leaves marks not just on stone, but on memory, on the way people walk, speak. Pause, and as you close your eyes you feel Rome still watching, not to accuse, not even to judge, only to remember, always. The night returns in layers, not with a jolt, not suddenly, but like a blanket drawn one fold at a time. The air grows cooler, not cold, just enough to make you tuck your hands into your sleeves. Somewhere in the distance, a lyre plays. Soft, unskilled, but honest. The notes do not chase perfection, they drift. They land where they may. You walk without knowing quite where you're headed. The city feels different at this hour, less like marble and more like breath, like something living, but tired. You find yourself near the old salt road, not the famous one. The lesser path used by servants, merchants, and mule drivers. Here the stones are uneven, some cracked, some missing entirely, and along its edge is a wooden pole, a single branch tied at the top. Nothing hangs from it now, but in earlier years it held a basket, one small enough to carry in a hand, one heavy enough to change a life. It was used for a punishment called libra muta, the mute scale. A merchant caught lying about the weight of goods was made to walk the road barefoot, carrying a basket filled with stones equal to the weight he claimed falsely. He could not stop, he could not speak. He was followed by a boy with a bell who rang once each time the merchant passed a milestone. The punishment ended when he reached the fifth. If he collapsed before then, he had to begin again the next day. It was not cruelty, it was memory, a way to make weight mean something again. Farther down, a man with white paint across his nose stands in a doorway. He leans on a cane that is clearly too tall for him. The angle is awkward, but he does not adjust. You nod. He does not nod back. He just blinks. Twice. Years ago, he was a language tutor for a patrician boy. The boy grew bored of Greek lessons and told his father that the tutor had mocked the family at a dinner. He hadn't, but the accusation was enough. His punishment? He was not imprisoned, he was not exiled. He was given a small silver token, flat, etched with a single word, specularius. It means mirror man. And for the rest of his life, he was to carry this token and speak only in repetition. If someone greeted him, he was to repeat the greeting back. If someone asked him the time, he could only echo the question. The law said it was a way to teach caution to tutors, but the people knew what it really meant. To be made into a mirror is to lose your shape. Later, you pass the Temple of Concordia, dark now. Its steps cool with dew. There's a story the marble won't tell. One of a senator's daughter who fell in love with a client's son. She confessed her feelings during a festival, in front of witnesses. The scandal was not in the love, but in the timing. She spoke of her heart while the city mourned a general's death. The punishment? She was given a lamp. It burned only olive oil mixed with tears, collected by servant girls paid to cry beside funerary pyres. She was told to keep it lit for 10 days, without letting it extinguish. If the flame went out, she had to begin again. No. One watched her. No one needed to. The city had already seen what mattered, the image, the girl, the lamp, the silence. By now you are walking along the Tiber. The river is still flat as metal. The moon lays across it like a sheet of hammered silver. You stop near a boat dock where a single pole leans at an angle. Once it was a punishment station, not for binding, but for reflection. Scribes who misrecorded taxes were sent here to rewrite the 12 tables by hand, from memory. While kneeling, they used ink made from river mud. Every error added another table to the task. The work took hours, sometimes days. When they finished, the scrolls were burned, not kept, not filed, burned, because the goal was not the words. It was the weight of repetition, the aching fingers, the slow stain of failure across one's knees. Not far from there you enter a quiet atrium garden, once a home, now a ruin, but the floor remains, tiled with tiny black stones, arranged in a spiral that never ends. This was once the house of a man who charged interest above the legal rate, a banker not caught, proven guilty, not ruined. Instead, he was made to host a dinner, one for 12 debtors he had wronged. He was required to seat them around this spiral, each guest one circle inward. He himself sat at the very center, and with each course he had to rise, serve the dish and step outward, leaving the center empty. By the end of the meal he was standing at the edge of the spiral, alone. He was not allowed to eat, only to serve. And when the dinner ended, the spiral stayed. They tiled it into the floor, and it remains empty now, but full of silence. As dawn approaches again, the world begins to breathe. The shutters creak. A dog barks once, then stops. And somewhere in the distance, water is drawn from a well. The day is beginning again. But in your bones the night lingers. You feel its weight in your limbs. Not unpleasant, just quiet, like the hush of a temple, the pause before a name. The echo of a punishment that never bruised but never left. Rome knew how to punish with lashes, but it knew even more how to punish with waiting, with mirrors, with lamps, with jugs of ash and scrolls of mud. These were not the punishments of power. They were the punishments of memory. They made you carry something, not forever, but long enough to remember, long enough that others remembered too. And as the light returns and your eyes begin to close, you wonder, what will you carry? Not in your hands, but in your silence, in your stillness, in the weight of a name not spoken. The day has begun, but the sun still hides behind rooftops. There is a hush to the air, not of fear, not even of quiet respect, but the hush of routine, the kind of silence that lives in places too tired to be loud. You walk with bare feet over packed earth, the kind that remembers footsteps even after the feet are gone. This is the hour when Rome feels most human, before the fire smoke thickens, before the voices rise, before punishment becomes spectacle again. At the edge of the Subura district, where the wealthy rarely go and the poor rarely leave, there is a wall marked with faint lines. They're not graffiti, they're score marks, a system only locals understand. Each line once recorded a name, though the names have worn away. Here punishment lived not in flesh or coin, but in disappearance. It was called umbra servitus, shadow servitude. It was not declared in court. It was arranged privately. A person who betrayed a neighbor by informing on illegal gatherings, by selling secrets, by mocking the poor to curry favor with the rich, would not be jailed. Instead, the people around them would choose to forget them, not figuratively but completely. They would not speak the name again. They would not sell to them, not greet them, not lend a hand in rain or fire. The person lived, but not within the city. Their home might remain. Their work might go on, but they were erased from story. The score mark on the wall was a final line through their presence, and in Rome, to be removed from story was worse than exile. You pass a laundress wringing tunics beside a public basin. The water sloshes, pink with dye and the memory of many skins. She hums a song without words, and you remember. There was once a senator's son, young, proud and fond, of wagering on chariot races. One day in front of a crowd he made a public bet against a rival house. He lost, but instead of paying in coin, he offered a public apology with a sneer. It wasn't enough. His punishment? He was required to wash the garments of the rival house's servants for 1 week, using only public water and soap made from ashes. Each day he stood here, beside the basin, wringing and rinsing while people passed, whispered, sometimes laughed. But the worst part? He wasn't mocked loudly. He was ignored. The city treated him as a worker. Nothing more, no scandal, no spectacle, just quiet labor. And when it ended, he never wagered again, at least not publicly. By mid-morning, the heat begins to press. Shadows shorten, the city begins to yawn and stretch, and the forum fills with slow motion. You reach a corner near the temple of Vesta, where a small platform of polished stone sits low to the ground. On its surface, the word dicere, to speak. But no one stands there now. Long ago this was used for the punishment of public exaggerators, those who spread rumors to inflate their role in politics or war. The punishment was called falsus orator, the false speaker. The guilty party was made to recite their own speeches again, word for word, but this time from the perspective of someone else in the story. The guard, the servant, the enemy, the slave. They stood on the platform, eyes lowered, and began again. I did not slay the rebels with brilliance. I watched from behind the torchman, wondering what would happen. Each retelling stripped away a layer of lie, until what remained was not truth exactly, but silence. They were allowed to finish only once they forgot how to glorify. Some wept, some could not finish. The stone remains, but no voice has echoed there in years. Still, every so often, someone pauses, touches the marble as if listening. Not far from there is a small bakery built into the side of an old bathhouse. The scent of yeast and anise rises into the warm air. The baker here wears a ring on every finger, each one mismatched, scratched, second-hand. He never speaks, only gestures. He was once a herald, an announcer for ceremonies, trusted with the pronunciation of names at civic rituals. But during one dedication, he mispronounced a general's name in front of the emperor. The crowd laughed. The emperor did not. Instead of execution, he was sentenced to lingua feriata, holiday tongue, a punishment where the voice is not taken, but shamed into sleep. He was given 30 days of absolute silence. No speaking, no humming, no reading aloud. Every time he opened his mouth, a coin was dropped into a jar beside him. If the jar filled before the month ended, he would be branded on the tongue. He did not speak. And when the punishment ended, he never started. Again, he became a baker, a master of gestures, flour, warmth. His rings click as he slices loaves, and sometimes, just before closing, he places a coin in a small jar behind the counter. He does not need to. But memory in Rome is an ingredient. By now the streets shimmer. The heat has drawn the sweat from stone. You duck into a shaded alley where ivy climbs over a cracked wall. Behind it lies the old house of the Crimson Scroll, a villa once owned by a family of poets and recorders. One of them, a daughter named Junia, was punished not for what she wrote, but for how she responded to being edited. She corrected a senator's public edict on a wall, fixing grammar and making the statement rhyme. It was seen as mockery. She was not whipped, not imprisoned. Instead, she was sentenced to serve as a private reader for a minor noblewoman who could neither read nor understand poetry. Each morning, Junia had to read to her aloud from texts chosen by others. She could not comment, could not explain, could not pause. If the noblewoman yawned, she had to start over. If she laughed at the wrong part, Junia had to continue. It lasted for a year. When it ended, Junia left Rome. But before she did, she painted a small line of verse beneath the ivy wall. Better to speak alone into wind than rhyme for ears that do not hear. The words are faint, but they remain. By evening the city settles. People pull shutters. The air smells of bread and sweat and oil lamps, and you feel the day begin to loosen its hold. As you walk back toward your quarters, you pass a courtyard lined with stone benches. In the center is a shallow pool. It no longer holds water, but once it did. It was the site of aqua morari, the punishment of reflection. Citizens found guilty of minor slanders, especially among women of status, were brought here. They were made to sit in silence, facing their own reflection for a day. A full daylight span. They could not turn away, could not cover their eyes. Servants refreshed the water every hour to keep it clear. It was said the punishment worked best in those who had forgotten how to see themselves. Most never returned. Those who did spoke more softly, not out of fear, but out of remembering. And so you return, not to punishment, not to pain, but to the soft bed of thought, to the strange warmth of Roman justice, which so often did not bruise the skin, but bent the soul. Rome's punishments were not always whips and chains. Sometimes they were mirrors, sometimes water, sometimes the simple absence of applause. And perhaps that is what made them last so long, longer than empires, because they punished not for the body's crime, but for the ego's. And ego, as Rome well knew, is slow to heal, slow to learn, slow to forget. The hour grows late, not deep into night, but the part of evening when the light goes sideways. Long shadows stretch like lazy fingers across the tiles. The heat lifts slowly, like steam retreating into cracks, and the city begins to whisper. Not speak, not shout, just whisper. Footsteps are softer now, voices quieter. Even the birds seem uncertain about song. You walk as though you belong to the stone, not heavy, not weightless, just part of it. You pass beneath an archway once used to mark boundaries between wards. No longer enforced, the line still lingers in the mind. They called this the linea ignota, the invisible line. For years it marked the difference between citizens who had full rights and those whose privileges had been paused. Not revoked, not removed, paused. These people had committed no crime, but they had offended decorum, the unspoken law of balance. Some had dressed above their station. Some had danced too wildly at funerals. Some had interrupted a priest's silence with laughter, their punishment. They could enter the forum but not speak. They could wear tunics but not color. They could dine but not recline. Their lives went on unchanged to the eye, but narrowed, as if the world dimmed just slightly around them. The punishment lasted 30 days, but the memory outlived it. Those who crossed the linea ignota never crossed it again, not even after it faded. A bit farther on there is a square basin once used to wash sacrificial knives. It's dry now, cracked, pale, rimmed in rust, but in the time of Hadrian, It became a place of ritual silence. A young orator, eager to impress, once described a military campaign as glorious slaughter. The word was not taken lightly. The Senate did not rebuke him in session. They invited him instead to the basin. He was told to sit alone for 5 hours, and each hour a different person would approach and wash their hands in the dry basin. No water, just the gesture, one hand, then the other. And after each washing they would whisper a name of someone lost in the campaign, then walk away. The orator could not move, could not speak. He sat through 50 names, 50 invisible washings, 50 ghosts. It was not called punishment, it was called reminder. He never used the word glory again. Onward still, and the lanterns begin to appear, some flickering, some already extinguished. A boy runs past with a basket of bread, his feet silent on the dust. You come upon an old bronze statue near a well. Its head is missing, but the base still reads Numen Obscurum, the forgotten presence. This was once the site of the inverted ritual. It was reserved for those who broke vows not by betrayal, but by indifference. A priest who forgot an offering, a magistrate who skipped a funeral, a widow who laughed during the mourning month. None of them committed evil. They simply forgot sacred rhythm, their punishment. They had to perform a full ritual, prayers, gestures, steps, but in reverse, starting at the altar and walking backwards, saying invocations out of order, wearing their robes inside out. It was not meant to shame, it was meant to unmake, to show what forgetting sacredness looked like. No one was mocked, no crowd was gathered, but those who passed by could not look away, because it is always unsettling to watch something holy. Backwards. Now you find yourself at the edge of a dry garden, overgrown, scattered with broken pottery and olive pits. Here, a punishment was handed down to a man who oversalted the communal feast. It seems small, but in Rome, to waste salt, still, sacred, was to mock the gods. He was not fined, not whipped. Instead, for 7 days he ate only bitter things, radish skins, underripe figs, ash-dusted roots, crushed acorns soaked in vinegar. The punishment had a name, Gustus Contrarius, the contrary taste. He was required to describe each item aloud to a scribe, with gratitude, no grimace allowed. If he winced, he had to start over. The punishment was not about suffering. It was about remembering that excess isn't just waste. It's theft from balance. You sit for a moment on a stone bench near the garden's edge. The air has cooled. A woman walks past carrying a jug of honey water. She does not see you, or pretends not to. And for a brief moment, you understand the gentlest punishment of all, nulla vicis, the punishment of being unacknowledged. It was used in private homes. If a member of the household disrupted harmony, without crime, but without apology, they would be unseen. For 1 full day, the household would act as though they were not there. No one would speak to them, serve them, look at them. They would eat what was left behind, move in silence, sleep apart. It was not cruel. It was controlled absence. And in the right household it cut deeper than words. The person returned the next day, but they always returned, smaller, wiser. As night folds in fully, you return to the top of the Palatine Hill. The palaces are dark now. Only the scent of oil and warm stone lingers. You sit near a marble basin once used to collect rainwater. It's empty tonight, but long. Ago, it held something stranger. For those who falsely claimed visions from the gods, The punishment was reverentia inversa, reverence reversed. They were placed here for an entire night, with three things: a sacred statue turned to face away from them, a scroll of sacred text written backwards, a bowl of saltless porridge. They were told to stay still, stay silent, and reflect. That was all, no chains, no guards. But the punishment was understood. They were surrounded by symbols that no longer acknowledged them, as if the divine had turned its back, and in a city that worshipped presence. Nothing hurt more than the suggestion of absence. You lie back on the stone now, not cold. Just cool enough to remind your skin it is real. The stars above you blink gently. The moon is thin, pale, worn, and the city exhales. No final punishment tonight, no lesson shouted. Just this, that Rome did not need to crush you to change you. It could do so with silence, with memory, with the weight of being seen, and then not. Its most bizarre punishments were not those of blood, but of mirrors, of backwards prayers, of empty bowls and reversed scrolls. And as your eyes grow heavy, you realize the real punishment was not in the act, but in the stillness that followed. The wind tonight moves low to the ground. It doesn't whistle or wail. It slips along the stone paths like a whisper made of breath, not cold, not warm, just present. You walk slowly through a part of the city that feels held in place by shadows. Not dangerous shadows, not the kind that carry secrets or threats, but old ones. Soft, resting outlines of people who stood once where you are now, waiting for judgment, or mercy, or simply to be noticed again. The buildings here lean slightly inward, not from design, but from the slow pull of time, as if even stone begins to bow after watching too many quiet punishments. You pass a staircase, carved unevenly into the side of a public grain hall. It leads nowhere now, just a stone wall. But long ago it led to a small door, where a strange sentence was once carried out. It was called Scala Remota. The staircase removed, a punishment, reserved not for criminals, but for those who sought attention without cause, men who falsely claimed to be harmed, women who wrote petitions filled with imagined slights, sons who pretended to be wronged in order to receive inheritance early. Their sentence? To walk up these stairs one by one and stand before the sealed door. Nothing more. The public watched, but they did not cheer, they did not scorn. They simply stood and observed the moment when performance met its end. At a door that never opened, then the condemned would descend, quietly, and return to their lives with fewer ears to listen. A little farther down the alley, you reach a cracked pillar wrapped in ivy. It is bent slightly, like an old back. No one speaks of it now, but once it was called columna parentis, the parents' post. This was a punishment handed to neglectful fathers, not violent ones, not cruel, just absent, too involved in politics or wine or their own stories to learn the names of their children's friends. The father would be summoned to the post. There he was required to speak aloud three things: the name of his child's best friend, a story his child had told within the last month, a list of 3 meals the child disliked. If he failed, he sat at the base of the pillar from sundown until dawn. During the night, nearby children were permitted to draw chalk outlines around him, like dreams he was no longer inside. In the morning, the drawings would be washed away, but the stillness of that night often remained. You stop at a public bench where a man sits playing a lyre with only 2 strings. He plays softly, and only for himself. He wears a robe of simple wool stitched unevenly with a red thread down the back. This thread is not fashion. It's a mark. He once misused metaphor in a legal trial. He was an advocate who compared a thief to a star fallen from heaven. The judge was not amused. For turning poetry into distraction, he was given the sentence of verbum nodatum, the knotted word. He had to wear a robe with a visible seam stitched by hand, knotted imperfectly at intervals. Each knot represented a word he had used in court that held no real meaning. He would wear it for 30 days. And each time someone asked about the robe, he had to explain one of the knots. He could not lie, he could not simplify. He had to remember the word and why it had failed. He plays the liar now, not to forget but to pass time, while meanings unravel. Just beyond him is a courtyard covered in marble dust. The ground crunches underfoot, not loud, just enough to remind you of your presence. This space once held a ritual called pietra pensata, the considered stone. It was used for those who accused others of false omens. A woman once claimed her neighbor's spilled oil was a curse upon her house. Another swore that a crow's cry from the wrong direction meant her husband's death was planned. When these accusations proved empty, fueled by fear or envy, the accused would be sent here. They were given a single stone, white, oval, smooth. They were told to carry it in their left hand from sunrise to sunset. If they dropped it, they had to start again the next day. Each hour they were to turn the stone once in their palm. No more, no less. Not for pain, not for spectacle, but for thought. It was believed that holding something so simple, so pure all day, helped clear the mind of imagined demons. The stone did not punish, it steadied, and sometimes it healed. Now you reach a fountain that barely flows. The water comes in small, uncertain trickles, like memory. This is the fons numinibus, the fountain of presences, and once it was home to a silent trial, when a citizen was accused of harming the spirit of a place by defacing a sacred site, by spitting near a shrine, by carving initials into an altar. They were brought here. There. Punishment was not written, not spoken. They were simply left to sit by the fountain until they understood what they had done. There were no hours counted, no guards, no food, only the sound of dripping water. When the accused rose of their own will, they were handed a reed and asked to clean the fountain's edge. That was all. If they refused, they returned the next day, not as a prisoner, but as someone unfinished. Most cleaned the edge after the first night. Some returned for weeks. A few never rose at all. You move. Now through a narrow street where laundry hangs above, dripping slightly. The drops fall on your shoulders like old echoes. You arrive at a wooden door painted with a single black line. Behind this door lived a woman once punished, not for what she did, but for how she responded to praise. She was a midwife, respected, skilled, calm. But one day a client wrote her name into a public record of saints, claiming she worked with the hands of the gods. She did not correct the entry. She encouraged it. The elders decided she had stepped beyond mortal boundary. Her punishment? Manus muta, the muted hand. She was asked to wear gloves sewn with white ribbon for 12 days. She could still work, ma'am, but only on animals, not people. For 12 days, the hands that had delivered dozens of babies were redirected to sheep, to stray dogs, to broken wings. It was not humiliation. It was redirection. And when the gloves were removed, she returned to her work. But her name never appeared in holy records again, and she seemed grateful. The lamps are nearly out now. The city breathes in, holds, waits. You feel the night settle like a cloak on your back, not heavy, not cold, just and final. But only for the day. not for the story. There is more ahead. More punishments that do not bruise, but bend, that do not scar, but settle. You walk past one final wall, a blank one. It holds no carving, no inscription, but somewhere beneath the plaster is a list of names too faint to read. These were the names of those whose punishments were never spoken aloud, because their crimes were never truly understood. Not theft, not lies, but imbalance. Rome did not always punish with clarity. Sometimes it punished with mystery, and sometimes that was the most bizarre sentence of all. It is now well past midnight. The sky has settled into its deepest tone, no longer blue, no longer purple, just darkness, soft and undisturbed, like the inside of a folded cloak. The city feels weightless, not silent, just muffled, like it has drawn a blanket over its face and breathed out a single long breath. Somewhere far off a cartwheel creaks, a dog barks once, then nothing again. You're alone but not abandoned, alone in the way that old places sometimes allow, held in a stillness that is neither welcome nor unwelcome, just present, and in this presence you keep walking. You enter a narrow corridor once used by scribes, now forgotten except by wind and dust. There is a small alcove carved into the wall. Inside it, a single marble foot, all that remains of a statue long removed. The plaque is cracked but still readable, Pede quiet, by the quiet foot. Here was carried out a strange kind of atonement, not for speaking wrongly, but for walking wrongly. Rome was a city of processions, military, religious, civic. And there were rules. You did not step before your place. You did not walk loudly on sacred ground. You did not pivot abruptly in the forum. To do so was seen not only as arrogance, but disruption of order. The punishment, you were asked to walk the entire length of the sacred way, backwards, slowly, in silence. Someone would walk ahead of you with a small bell, ringing gently at each corner. Not to alert danger, but to remind the public, order must be restored gently, not with punishment, but with presence. You walked until your feet ached, until the order returned. Then the bell fell silent. You passed through a market gate where vines have overtaken the arch. Long ago, the Porta Clementia led to the Mercy Market, where expired food was given freely to the poor. But one man, an elder, once hoarded the market's figs, not to eat, but to sell the seeds to a neighboring farm. This wasn't theft. Not exactly, but it disrupted the spirit of the place. The sentence was semina muta, silent seeds. He was instructed to plant 100 fig seeds in dry soil along the outskirts of the city. Each day, he would water them from a single small jug. He was not told what to expect. No one said they would grow. No one promised forgiveness. But in the end, 5 of the seeds did sprout. 1 bore fruit. And the tree that still stands near the southern gate? It's marked with a ring of white stones. People leave pieces of stale bread beneath it, not for luck, but for memory. You wander now into a small forum used only in twilight hours. The locals once called it Forum Obscurum, the shadow market. It was here that a young senator was punished for interrupting a sacred debate, not with anger but with laughter. He had giggled at the wrong moment during a reading of omens. It was not blasphemy. It was levitas, lightness when gravity was needed. He was ordered to serve a sentence known as risus equus, the equal laugh. Each evening, for 1 full lunar cycle, he would walk the shadow market just before midnight. At each stall he was required to tell a story, true or invented, that ended in laughter. He could not laugh himself, only the listener could. If the story failed, he had to return the next night with a new one. He completed the cycle, but never laughed in the Senate again. Not once. Some say he forgot how, others say he learned what laughter costs. Beyond the forum is a low garden fenced with short stumps. You step over them carefully. Inside is an open square of packed dirt. No grass, no trees, just stone seats shaped like half-moons. This was the site of corpus umbrae, the body of shadows, a punishment reserved for those who mocked the mourning of others. A woman once rolled her eyes during a public funeral. Another man made jokes during the reading of a grave curse. Their punishment was not scolding, not exile. They were summoned to the garden at sundown. There, shadow puppeteers, trained in the old style, would perform silent plays, reenacting moments of loss, devotion, and memory, using only candlelight and fingers. No speech, no music, just light and hands and breath. The condemned were required to sit for the entire performance without turning away. If they wept, they were absolved. If they scoffed, they were returned the next evening. Most wept. Eventually. You find a bench carved from pale travertine and sit for a moment. The wind lifts gently. A moth dances above your knee, then vanishes. From here, you can just see the corner of a roof marked with green copper. It's part of what used to be the Domus Silenti, the House of Silence. This place held a punishment so quiet, many did not realize it was punishment at all. It was for the loud, not the criminals, not the liars, just those who refused to yield space, people who interrupted too often, who spoke over widows, who drowned out the voices of children. They were sent to live for 3 days in the House of Silence. No one spoke to them. Meals were left at the door. Inside, the rooms were lined with wool to soften every echo. No instruments, no birds, no servants. Even the doors were padded. It was not isolation. It was reflection. The goal was not to cage them, but to surround them with the very thing they denied others. After 3 days, they returned quieter, not defeated, just aware. As you walk again, the lamps now flicker like tired eyes. Each flame leans, flickers, endures. You turn toward the Subura, once a bustling, raucous district, now mostly sleeping. Here you pass a painted door marked with red wax, the mark of sermofractus, broken speech. This was punishment for those who spread rumors, not lies, rumors. Subtle things that wore down trust, slow as rain on marble. When someone was found to be the source of such whispers, they were given a small box. Inside, a scroll, blank except for a single phrase, quid sis. What do you know? For 1 week they were to write down everything they said aloud each day. Not thoughts, not secrets, just speech. At the end of the week the scrolls were read back to them, not with judgment, just calmly. Most found the echo of their own voice to be louder than they remembered, and once they heard their words stitched together, the rumors stopped. One final turn, you come to a door nearly swallowed by ivy. A step leads down into a chamber once used for sacred oaths. Here was performed the rarest of punishments. Lux inversa, the reversed light. It was not for cruelty or failure. It was for those who pretended wisdom they didn't possess. Her philosopher who misquoted texts, a healer who faked omens, a judge who cited dreams instead of laws. These were not frauds. They were performers of knowledge. Their sentence was simple. They would sit in the chamber from dusk until the first light of dawn. Candles would be placed behind them, casting their shadow onto the wall in front, and for the entire night they were to speak only in questions. No answers, no declarations, only questions. It was said that by the end of the night, a person either unraveled or became wiser. Sometimes both. As dawn begins to stir again across the edge of rooftops, you realize something. Rome's strangest punishments were not about pain. They were about memory. They sought not to break the body, but to rearrange the self, not to wound, but to warn, to whisper through rituals, repetition, and reversal. Do not forget who you are, not because of fear, but because the city itself remembered for you, even when you didn't. The sky is beginning to change, just slightly. The deepest blue has lifted, not to dawn, not yet, but to something softer. A kind of pre-light. That moment when darkness loosens its grip and the stars begin to forget their own names. You are still walking. Not because you must, but because something in this city invites you to keep going. To keep discovering the corners it left untouched by time. And here you reach another. At the edge of the old grain quarter, behind a crumbling stable once used to house ceremonial oxen, there lies a circle of steps sunken into the earth. This was once called the Gradus Oblivionis, the steps of forgetting, and it was a punishment used not for crime, but for grief. In the Roman calendar, mourning had its place. Grief had a time limit. Too much sorrow, too long remembered, was thought to imbalance the gods. Those who could not stop weeping were brought here, not against their will, but by invitation. The grieving were led, barefoot, down into the stepped hollow just as the sun set. They were handed a bowl of warm water and a smooth cloth, and they were asked, gently, to speak the name of the one they had lost. Each time they spoke it, they dipped their fingers into the water and wiped the cloth along the stone. The idea was simple. The name would soften the stone would absorb the loss, and the griever would rise again. Slightly lighter. No one was rushed. Some stayed hours. Some came back for weeks, but each eventually left, not empty, but less burdened. A little farther on is a cracked archway leading to a narrow tunnel. It was called Via Umbrae Rasai, the path of erased shadows. In Rome, some punishments were for those who pretended not to see, a magistrate who looked away from a beating, a baker who ignored the cries of a child locked in a cellar next door, a soldier who passed a chained man and said, "It is not mine to question." Their guilt wasn't inaction, but absence, and so they were asked to walk this path, alone. Torches were placed behind them, casting long shadows ahead. The tunnel was lined with mirrors, each one angled to reflect only the shadow. Never the face. The punished were told, walk until your shadow vanishes. And eventually it did, not because it was gone, but because light, when manipulated just so, can remove even what's most constant. When the shadow disappeared, the tunnel ended, and the punishment did too. You continue down a side road that was once part of the Vicus Medicus, the healer's quarter. Here, a very rare punishment was performed, manus separatae, the separated hands. This was not for medical error, it was for greed. Physician who charged a poor family double for a fever cure, an herbalist who sold common weeds as rare remedies, a surgeon who insisted on payment before touching the wound. The sentence was this: for 1 week, the healer could not use both hands on the same task. If they stirred a tonic, one hand had to hold the spoon, while the other held nothing. If they treated a wound, one hand applied the cloth, and the other rested behind their back. They had to ask for help. They had to slow down. The point was not humiliation. It was to remind them healing is not done alone, and profit is not the measure of care. Most healers who endured the week changed their prices after. Some never returned to medicine. A few became better than ever. A small domed pavilion comes next. Low, rounded, covered in lichen. It was once known as Domus Titulorum, the House of Labels. This was where Romans punished the overly judgmental, not those who enforced the law, but those who gave unwanted names. A man who called his sister's suitor less than Roman. A widow who nicknamed her neighbor's daughter the unwashed dove. A merchant who referred to anyone poorer than him as faex urbis, scum of the city. Their punishment? They were summoned to the house at dusk. Inside, dozens of clay tags hung from wooden beams, each bearing a different insult. They were asked to wear one tag around their neck, chosen randomly. Then walk the forum for 1 hour. No one was allowed to mock them. No one was allowed to question them, but the public would read the tag: arrogant, stingy, impure, coward, and they would glance, then look away. Because the punishment wasn't about receiving scorn, it was about sitting inside a word and understanding how easily it's given and how deeply it stains. At the edge of the Aventine Hill is a wall so old it no longer connects to anything. Just a freestanding slab, worn smooth on both sides. It is called Murus Respicientium. The Wall of the Watching. In times of civic unrest, when the city needed calm, but too many voices rose in conflict, this wall was used to remind the population of something quieter. It was not punishment for speaking, it was for failing to listen. Citizens were summoned, never more than 3 at a time, and stood before the wall. Behind them, a small group of children. The citizens were told, "Repeat what they say," and the children spoke. They recited names, they told jokes, they whispered riddles, they cried, they sang. Whatever the children said had to be repeated, word for word, tone for tone, until the citizen's voice was no longer their own. Until they remembered how to listen. Most walked away dazed, some walked away smiling, a few walked away silent. The light is now silver. That strange in-between color, neither night nor morning, just quiet silver. And ahead, in the shadow of the Temple of Janus, is a final little chamber, one used for the rarest sentence of all, umbra nullius, the shadow of no one. It was reserved for those who craved power without cost, not emperors, not generals, but lesser men and women who placed themselves in roles of judgment, unasked and unearned. They acted like gods in the lives of others, dismissing the sick, belittling the poor, speaking over the old, shaming the strange. Their sentence? They were brought into the chamber at dusk. There, a single lamp hung low, casting no shadow. They were seated on a stone stool. In front of them, nothing. Behind them, nothing, and they were told, "You will stay here until someone asks for your return." Sometimes it took an hour, sometimes a day. Once, it took 7. And when they returned to the world, they were always quieter, because they had seen what it meant to be needed by no one. The city is nearly breathing again. The rooftops hold gold now. The birds test their voices, and you have seen what most Romans never did. Not the glorious punishments, not the executions or tortures, but the intimate justice, the soft, strange rituals. The punishments meant not to hurt, but to reshape, to remind, to slow. You walk now not as a visitor, but as someone marked by the city's oldest truths. That power is fleeting, that cruelty is loud. But justice can be a whisper that lasts forever. It's morning now, but not the kind you feel. just the kind you notice. The lamps are extinguished. The sky is the color of pale ash, and everything waits. Even the birds pause. Even the breeze seems unsure if it should start. In this hour, between silence and life, Rome begins again. But you are still deep in its oldest shadows. There's one more path to follow. A narrow trail lined with stones that do not match. No symmetry, no design. Just a path cobbled together by time itself. It leads to a broken arch that once marked the entrance to the Aula Cineris, the Hall of Ash. The hall was never official. It doesn't appear in city maps or records. And yet, its purpose was known to many. This was where Romans sent those who had destroyed something that could not be rebuilt. A scroll burned in anger. A sacred statue knocked over in a drunken haze. A friendship torn apart by cruel words that could never be taken back. No legal consequence could undo the damage. So a ritual emerged instead. The guilty were led to the hall with a small pouch of fine ash. Inside the hall, a single long table of black marble. Upon it, a blank wax tablet. They were told, pour the ash slowly. Shape what you destroyed. If it had been a scroll, they traced the lost words. If it had been a statue, they shaped the outline. If it had been a person they wronged, they formed a face. Not detailed. Just a suggestion, a shadow in dust. Then they sat and watched. For 1 full hour, no wind, no speech, just the silent collapse of shape back into dust. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't correction. It was witness to what was done, to what could not be undone. To the quiet grief of consequence. Not far from the hall is a crumbling rotunda, once painted in saffron and indigo. Its purpose, verba inversa, inverted words. It was for those who lied not to deceive, but to impress. Boastful, soldiers, embellished poets, merchants who promised more than they could give. Their words didn't hurt, but they distorted, so they were summoned to the rotunda. In its center, a single bronze mirror hung from the ceiling at an angle. The guilty were given a scroll containing their own words, but reversed, not rewritten, reversed. Each letter, each word flowing backward. They had to read them aloud, slowly, carefully, until the sounds of their own boastings became nonsense. Until their voice turned unfamiliar, and then silence. The mirror reflected not their face, but the words floating above their head, unreadable, but still theirs. You follow a sloping alley now, where vines have claimed every wall. The air is thick, with time and dust. At the end stands a cracked colonnade once known as Domus Speculi, the House of Mirrors, but not for vanity. This place held a punishment designed for those who judged others based on appearances, too quickly, too cruelly, without patience. A woman mocked a man for his limp. A magistrate dismissed a boy with uneven features. A noblewoman laughed at a merchant's stained tunic. They were led here not to be mocked in return, but to see differently. Inside the house were 12 mirrors, each warped but subtly. One softened the eyes, one broadened the smile, one removed the ears entirely. Another stretched the body tall and thin. The punished were told, "Find the mirror that shows you as you are." And they walked and stared. Most could not find it, because the lesson wasn't which one was true, but that none were, not fully, not ever. And when they left, their glances toward others softened, almost vanished. You pass under an aqueduct. Now where ivy has turned the stone to emerald, here lies the most poetic of all Roman punishments, sonus desonans, the fading sound. It was for those who interrupted music, a bard silenced mid-song, a funeral dirge cut short by noise, a mother's lullaby broken by shouting. The punishment was a ritual of reversal. The interrupter was brought to a quiet courtyard where musicians played, but the music was incomplete. Each song stopped just before its resolution. Each melody ended one note early. Again and again, the mind waited, aching for closure. But it never came, only silence. That unfinished note lingered in the punished person's head for days, sometimes weeks, until they learned. Interrupting beauty leaves a noise that never fades. Near the riverbank, you find a low wooden door, sun-bleached and bowed. It opens into the taberna animi, the tavern of the soul. This wasn't for criminals, nor for liars, nor even for the boastful. This place was for those who had forgotten how to be still. A man who rushed through temples without kneeling. A woman who interrupted her own prayers. A merchant who tapped his foot through every moment of silence. The punishment to sit, just sit. In a darkened room lit only by one small oil lamp, they were served bread, a jug of water, and a single instruction carved into the table. Stay until the lamp dies. For some that was an hour, for others nearly a day, no sound, no movement, just the flicker of the flame and the echo of their own thoughts. Many wept, some laughed, a few begged to return again years later, not to be punished, but to remember. How stillness could be sacred. You walk now through one final passage, a stairwell of uneven steps, each one carved with a single word, voce, memoria, umbra, silere, voice, memory, shadow, be still. At the top, an open terrace facing the sea. This was the place of ventus tardus, the slow wind. Here Rome sent those who moved too fast to notice others, runners who shoved the elderly aside, charioteers who raced through crowded streets, speakers who trampled over the silences of others. They were brought here at dusk, blindfolded, seated on a stone bench facing the wind, and they were told, breathe until the wind breathes with you. That was it. No lesson, no pain, just the quiet realization that nothing rushed, yet everything moved. The sun is fully risen now. Its light spills across rooftops like warm cloth. Birds sing, doors creak open, life returns. But you are still carrying the weight of all these strange, quiet rituals, not brutal, not loud, not theatrical, but unforgettable, because Rome did not just punish the body, it punished the soul. With mirrors, with ash, with unfinished songs, with silence, it whispered instead of shouted, and in those whispers it taught. There is something strange about the final hours before the city fully wakes. It isn't just the quiet, it's the sense that the stones remember you now, that your feet are part of their rhythm, that Rome is no longer a place you're visiting, but a language you've begun to understand. Not the Latin carved into walls, not the laws or decrees, but the rhythm of justice itself, soft, ceremonial, and full of small, strange poetry. And now, one last corridor remains. It leads downward, a slow, sloping spiral into the bedrock beneath the Aventine. This is where the air grows cool, even in summer, where moss lines the edges of ancient bricks, where time forgets how to move forward. This is the path to the Hippogum Clementiae, the underground of mercy. Here Rome placed those whose punishments had been too harsh, not to reverse the sentence, but to reintroduce balance, It was believed that punishment, like wine, must be diluted. Too strong, and it damages the vessel. Too weak, and it has no effect. When a citizen had suffered more than the crime deserved, or when the city had judged in haste, they were brought here not to be healed, but to be acknowledged. In the center of the hypogeum was a shallow pool. In it, a slow drip of water from a natural spring. The punished were invited to sit and watch. The ripples, that's all, no words, no tasks. Just the pattern of rings spreading across water. It was believed the soul would realign not through words, but through watching balance return again, and again, and again. Above ground now, in the sun's first warmth, is a square of flagstones. Known only to a few, locals call it plate votis ruptis, the square of broken vows. This was a public space, but used only for one kind of punishment, false oaths, not legal lies. Those had their place in court. This was for broken promises. Of the heart, a man who pledged eternal love then vanished. A woman who swore she'd wait and didn't. A friend who promised loyalty, then whispered betrayal. When witnesses came forward, when the community agreed, the vow breaker was brought to this square. In the center was a single bronze bowl. They were handed a pebble, small, smooth, inscribed with one word, verum, truth. They were told to drop it into the bowl and to walk away without looking back. But the bowl was deep, and the sound of the pebble hitting the bottom was louder than most expected. It rang, not sharp, not metallic, but low, final, the kind of sound that reminds you, words once spoken, live on. At the southern edge of the city stood a grove, tall cypress trees, crushed pine needles underfoot, a hush that even birds respected. This was the Silva, Reorum, the forest of the accused, a place for those still awaiting judgment, not criminals, not yet, just those under question. But Rome, in rare mercy, believed the waiting itself could destroy a soul, so once a month the accused were brought here. They walked the grove in silence, no guards, no chains, just witnesses. At intervals, wooden stations marked by a simple phrase, "If I am innocent." Each station invited a pause, a breath, a reflection. If I am innocent, may my shadow lie long. If I am innocent, may my feet find no stone. If I am innocent, may the wind not chill me. The forest offered no answer, but those who walked it emerged changed, either steadier in truth or heavier in guilt. Closer to the forum, hidden beneath the foundations of an old bathhouse, is a chamber known as cubiculum contrari, the room. Of the opposite, this was a punishment for those whose cruelty had no clear shape, no blow, no theft, just contradiction. A senator who preached temperance yet drank in secret, a priest who condemned desire yet whispered to slaves, a mother who praised obedience yet broke every rule herself. Their sentence was to sit in this room of mirrors, but the mirrors reflected only opposite images. Smile and they frowned. Frown and they smiled. Move forward and they receded. Even the smallest gesture reversed. After 1 hour, the punished often left in tears, not from pain, but from seeing themselves undone, from realizing they had split themselves, and the pieces no longer fit. You walk slowly now through the Basilica Julia, or what remains of it. Columns open to the sky, marble tiles with weeds growing between them. This was once a court of law, but outside the court, under a covered arcade, was a space for an entirely different kind of judgment. It was known as spatium risus, the place of laughter. Here those who mocked others' pain were brought, a boy who laughed at a limping veteran, a merchant who giggled at a beggar's torn cloak, a woman who chuckled during a widow's testimony, their punishment to be laughed at, but with no malice. Professional performers were summoned, jugglers, mimes, poets who specialized in absurdity. They performed around the punished, not to shame them, but to surround them with the sound they had misused. Laughter not as cruelty, but as mirror. Some resisted, some wept. A few laughed along, and when they left, their laughter was different, softer, earned. And now, the final walk. Back toward the heart of the city. The sounds of the market begin to rise, not loud but present, the scent of baking bread, the clip of sandals on stone, the chatter of waking life. But before the forum reclaims you, there is one last turn, a path known only in whispers, the vicus ultimus, the final way. It leads to a small open courtyard, no inscriptions, no statue, just a single circular bench made of travertine. This is where those who had served all their punishments came, not to be judged, not to be thanked, just to sit and hold what remained. Some stayed minutes, some hours. One record tells of a man who stayed until night returned. The lesson was simple. You have walked through shadow. Now sit in the light, and so have you, through quiet corridors, through punishments that whispered more than they struck, through rituals that reshaped rather than crushed. This is not how the world remembers Rome. We remember the lions, the swords, the blood. But beneath the violence, beneath the empire, was this soft, strange truth, that punishment need not be pain, that justice need not be loud, that change is often quiet. And somewhere beneath the feet of tourists and the wheels of taxis, this Rome still breathes, waiting, listening, carving new mirrors from broken stone, and reminding us that sometimes the strangest justice is the most human of all. Good night.